So I thought it would be a cool idea to show a little bit of a time lapse for a painting that I recently completed for a fan art contest and talk a little bit about the thought process and the construction process that went into it. It was for a fan art contest for an indie fantasy series called Fiendish, and the contest was pretty straightforward for the most part, just draw something from the comic book. So after reading some of the world building, I settled on a portrait image of one of the characters, but done in a more classic fantasy painting style. This was the rough draft that I painted up in probably just over an hour or so, and you'll see here that I'll start to paint over this draft and slowly build up more layers of refinement and detail, and treating it a bit more like sculpting than painting, really adding in bits and pieces of form, shape and colour instead of clay. But this is going to give us a good opportunity actually to talk a little bit about adapting something like a comic book character into something that's a bit more three-dimensional. If we are taking something that is more flat and 2D like animation, cartoons, or in this case comic books, and turning it into something a bit more lifelike, then we're going to have to think carefully about how best to do this. The first thing we have to ask ourselves when adapting something to this style is, well, how close can I retain the general look and silhouette of the original design? It's inevitable that compromises get made along the way, but from the very beginning, our goal should be to try to keep things as close to the original creation as possible. At the very beginning here, I was thinking that the character's very vibrant, almost neon green colored hair is probably going to be an issue in terms of harmonizing with the other colors. The character has been designed with this really nice complementary red-green color scheme, but those are two colors that are also going to be fighting for the viewer's attention. So it probably means sacrificing a little bit of the vibrancy to have these colors work better together as a team. The other challenge we're going to be faced with doing an image like this is trying to ensure we develop as much movement and action within the scene as possible. Animators and comic artists have a great advantage over us realist painters in that they can push the gestures and proportions to a much further degree than what we can. And this is because the audience is a little bit more forgiving when things are more simplified and two-dimensional. So from the very beginning, we have to look out for anything within the character or the composition to help generate that movement. Lucky in this instance, she's got her long braided hair, she's got that fur coat, and of course her skirt, exactly the type of elements that we can use to create action. Now, we don't have the luxury of time compared to other creative mediums. Films can be 3 hours long, a novel can be 1,000 pages, even a comic book can have multiple panels within a page. So in order to keep the audience's attention on our single image, we have to use whatever tricks are available to us. We also need to do a little bit of research when doing adaptations, especially for costuming. We want to look at all sorts of clothing styles, textures, patterns, and think about which ones might work best with the original character's design. If our costume elements are a bit too smooth, then things start to look a little too flat and boring. So we want that fur coat to look nice and fluffy, that leather belt to have all sorts of scratches and marks. But we also need to ensure we don't go overboard with that either. In the same way that we want a good balance between light and shadow, we want a good balance between smooth and textured surfaces. But it's not just texture that we have to balance. We've got this sliding scale of design components that we have to somehow make work together. We've got gesture, form, shape, color, temperature, value, the list goes on. This is the checklist we want to have for ourselves in order to compose. Composing is generally thought of in a musical context, but it's applicable throughout any creative process. The musician has 12 notes to write music with, and we have our own artistic notes to help create things. This is how we orchestrate and how we conduct the audience to follow the path we want them to follow. But if they've wandered off that path, then somewhere along the line we've made a mistake. It can't be stressed enough. It's not the audience's responsibility to interpret what's being expressed. It's our responsibility as the artist to lead them around in the direction that we want. We don't need to put down every single detail. We just need to put down enough information to get them to follow along. So learning our design components helps us to create a process for our art which ultimately makes our lives easier. But there are going to be many errors along the way. We'll make our figures too stiff and lifeless, we'll make our colors too flat and muted, but that's just part of the learning process. It's really about embracing the errors and learning how to manage them. It's very easy for us creative types to be our own worst critics, so our goal from the very beginning of our learning has to be to analyze our progress and not criticize it. We need to observe not only the things we are doing wrong, but also the things we are doing right. If we know what our shortcomings are, it means we can plan ahead of time. You may have seen earlier that I had to resize the head a little bit, and that's because I've got a bad tendency to draw heads that are way too small. So I know that before I do any major detailing or rendering, I have to double check that head's proportions. There were also additional changes you may have seen as well. The hair changed styles, the position of the skirt shifted, and the background values had been changed too. Just a few things that weren't really working originally. Now, you could spend endless amounts of time on fixing things up, but at a certain point, you have to be willing to let it go and learn from the experience. I probably made the character a little bit too saturated in color, but that's just something I'll have to live with. So just do the best you can at the time, learn from it, tomorrow come back and try again. So this image is more or less done, so I hope the character's original creator is okay with some of the liberties I've taken here. Again, I'll leave a link to the Fiendish webpage and campaign in the description if you're interested in seeing more. And if you're interested in wanting to see more demonstrations like this where we can talk about art, painting, philosophy, all that stuff, let me know in the comments. And if you're new to art or looking to improve, then check out my range of beginner-friendly art classes available on Skillshare to stream or for outright purchase on Gumroad. They are designed to be very accessible for newcomers, so if you're interested in learning more about art, the links to both will be in the description below.